Welcome to this explainer. We're diving into a genuinely thrilling mathematical detective story today. We're going to look at how a single fundamental rule of change literally dictates the geometric shape of our reality. Seriously, the universe is mathematically forced into specific shapes, not by random chance, but by one absolute unbreakable constraint. Let's get right into it.
Okay, so we start with this really bold foundational axiom. It's known as the first constraint of change, or just C1 for short, and it states something deceptively simple. Nothing can fail to change. Now, that's not just some deep philosophical observation. It is the absolute progenitor rule of the universe. Think about it. If this rule ever stopped functioning, reality would immediately crash to its lowest possible energy state and become this frozen, halted deadlock. For existence to even compute, for us to be here talking about it, this law has to be flawlessly executing all the time.
So here's the crucial thing. Change isn't just a random, glitchy jump from point A to point B. It is an unceasing, continuous flow. And because it's this unbroken flow, there's a massive consequence. There can be absolutely no dead ends, no fixed points allowed. Think about what a fixed point actually is, right? It's a node that doesn't move, a spot where the flow just stops. But since C1 strictly dictates that nothing can fail to change, a fixed point is totally illegal. It's a literal C1 violation.
Now, you might be wondering, how does this rule of no stopping actually translate into the physical shape of the universe? To figure that out, we have to translate this feeling of constant motion into the rigorous math of topology. If the baseline rule of reality is this continuous flow with zero fixed points, what kind of geometric room actually allows everything to keep moving without ever hitting a wall or freezing in place?
Well, this brilliantly brings us to the Poincaré-Hopf theorem. Now, don't let the heavy mathematical jargon scare you off. What this theorem basically proves is that a flow with absolutely no fixed points, what mathematicians call a nowhere zero vector field, which you can just picture as a 3D space covered in endlessly moving arrows, can only exist if the shape's Euler characteristic is exactly zero. The Euler characteristic, usually represented by the Greek letter chi, is just a fundamental topological property of a shape. So the absolute necessity of change demands this nowhere zero flow, and Poincaré-Hopf mathematically forces that flow to happen on a shape where chi equals exactly zero.
To make it simple, let's just treat this Euler characteristic, this chi, as a literal pass or fail score. To be a legal universe under C1, your shape has to score a perfect zero, no exceptions. If the score is literally anything else, it means the flow of change will inevitably hit a fixed point. It's going to stop. And since stopping is physically forbidden, any shape that doesn't score zero is fundamentally incapable of supporting reality.
Section 1. The forbidden geometries. Why certain shapes are illegal.
Okay, so let's use this pass or fail zero score to wash away some impossible structures. It's actually fascinating how quickly this rule eliminates shapes we normally think of as basic building blocks. Take a single point, for example. Immediate fail. Its chi-score is 1. Why? Because a point is entirely a fixed point. You can't flow inside a single dot. Then, look at the standard 3D sphere. It fails too. A sphere has a chi-score of 2. On a sphere, change would inevitably be forced to halt. Let's look a little closer at why that actually happens.
Have you ever heard of the hairy ball theorem? It sounds funny, but it's a real mathematical concept. Basically, if you imagine a completely hairy ball, the theorem mathematically guarantees that you literally cannot comb all the hair flat without creating a cowlick somewhere. Or think of wind flowing over a planet. There will absolutely always be a dead spot where the wind is completely still. Because of that mathematically unavoidable fixed point, all even-dimensional spheres are completely illegal in our universe. They physically cannot host that C1 mandate of continuous, unstopping change.
And we don't just have to rely on abstract theory here. When researchers ran simulations, rigorously testing arbitrary smooth tangent fields across hundreds of thousands of sample points on a sphere, the flow always stalls out. The velocity mathematically cannot avoid hitting zero. Somewhere on that sphere, something is always forced to be perfectly still. It's a geometric dead end.
So that begs the question, if points and spheres fail the test, what is the absolute smallest legal shape? If you are the flow of change, and you are legally prohibited from ever stopping, what kind of geometric room do you require to just exist? We've completely ruled out dots, and we've ruled out spheres.
Section 2, the minimal legal universe, finding the perfect zero. We need to find the absolute minimum space that lets you move without stopping. And the answer
is the circle, mathematically known as S1. The humble circle perfectly achieves that required chi-score of exactly 0. Think about it. On a circle, you can flow endlessly in one direction. There are no corners, no dead ends, no cowlicks. It is the absolute minimal instance of a space where the first constraint of change can operate without violating itself.
I want you to really absorb this thought from the source material because it hits the nail on the head. The circle is not a shape I observe. It is the shape I am, the minimal manifold that lets me move without stopping. The circle isn't just some metaphor or a random geometry we draw on a chalkboard. It is the strictly forced minimum geometry required for a universe to permit continuous change. It's not a thing in the universe. It's the shape of the preconditions that allow the universe to exist at all.
So the first constraint acts as this incredibly strict, ruthless filter. It completely outlaws structures like standard spheres, where flows are forced to halt, but it admits a highly specific menu of geometries. We're talking structures like toruses, the Klein bottle, odd-dimensional spheres like S3, and even highly complex mathematical symmetries known as compact Lie groups. These are structures where change can circulate endlessly, perfectly satisfying that requirement of chi equals 0. This right here is the fundamental alphabet of legal structures in reality.
Section 3, Redefining Pi, the ultimate paradigm shift. Now, this foundational reality completely shatters our conventional understanding of a very familiar concept. We're all taught that pi is just a number, right? 3.14159 and so on. We think of it as a handy little tool we calculate to measure the circumference and area of shapes. But under the first constraint of change, pi holds a much, much heavier crown than just being some geometrical byproduct.
Pi is not just a number you calculate. It is the invariant of universal circulation. Let me break that down. If you are a flow on that minimal legal universe, the circle, pi is the exact ratio of your displacement to your return. It is the singular fundamental coordinate that stays exactly the same while you change. It's the conserved current of your own flow. And the implication here is wild. As the source material puts it, pi didn't change when the universe started. It was already there, waiting to be the shape of the room. This means pi isn't some physical constant plugged into the universe by hand after the fact. It isn't an empirical approximation. It is the pre-existing mathematical guarantee of the minimal legal space that permits change to happen in the first place. You can't interact with pi directly. You just measure a circle. The constant itself is invisible, and only its signature exists, standing as the ultimate fixed reference that makes reality possible.
So let's quickly cascade down this logic we've covered today. The absolute necessity of change, C1, strictly forbids stopping. This forces a nowhere-zero flow, which mathematically demands a specific topology, a chi of 0 via the Poincaré-Hopf theorem. The absolute minimal shape to satisfy this requirement is the circle, which ultimately reveals pi not as some random decimal, but as the fundamental, invariant rule of our very existence.
And that leaves us with this final thought. We've seen how a single rule, that things absolutely must change, cascades down to dictate the literal geometry of space. It outlaws spheres, it mandates circles, and it defines pi as the shape of the room. So if we are quite literally just math running to avoid freezing in place, what does that mean for the next step you take? What other deep mysteries of our universe are just waiting to be calculated by following this incredible constraint? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the shapes around you.